Welcome back to the second part tutorial. In this video I will be using the ZBrush renders from the previous video to composite my image within Photoshop. This will be quite a long video, so go grab a cup of coffee or tea and let's get started. So I have just gone ahead and imported all those separate images that we exported from ZBrush into this Photoshop scene and cropped it slightly so that we don't have all that extra space that we're not going to use. So in the materials section I've just imported all the materials in here, and as I go along I'll show you where I place these materials so that you can follow along in your own design. And you've got the flat color, you've got the lights in here, all those specular lights and rim lights that we rendered out, the subsurface scattering, the depth, ambient occlusion, shadow, ID map, mask, and normal map. So yeah, that's all the renders we have made for our model. So the first thing I like to do when starting off is turn off everything that I don't need and go straight to the base model, which is this one, and I'll open up the materials section, turn on materials, unhide all those, or hide all those, sorry, and start off with this map the first map we rendered out in ZBrush. And this one I tend to go for a soft or overlay texture as a texture, and then play around with the opacity and the fill, and you'll find that we'll do this with the majority of the materials that we've rendered out, so we can get a good final image. I also like to have a small navigation window open so that if I'm really close up here I can see how the final piece will look in the small window here. It's always a good idea to keep really as far away from the model or the composition as possible, so that you don't get bogged down with small details, just like in ZBrush when you're sculpting. So that one was set to soft light. The next one is this material, which I usually set to a divide. And sorry if I don't know the name, I can't remember the names of these materials. But it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things as long as you remember which ones we are looking at. And then I will play around with the fill and opacity until I get a nice feel for the map that I just put on there. So this would be our cavity map, and we can go into the levels here and play around with the levels a bit so we can get some nice crisp black lines. Sometimes I'll also maybe invert the map and put that as a soft light, or any of these other parameters here, adjustments here, until I'm happy with it. I think I'm going to go for an overlay but invert it, or soft light, sorry, and then just play around with the opacity again and the fill until I'm happy, and then move on to the next one. For this one I'm just going to look through these and see which one will make the model look good. So it can be quite a long process of figuring out which one works well, and if you ever wanted to change the overall color of the material, it's easy, just go to the hue saturation and you can adjust the color in here, or the amount of saturation here, or the lightness of it. There we go. So let's say that's fine. The metal, now because the whole thing's not made of metal, we just want to emphasize the chain and the the bracelet around his neck. We can go to the ID map, grab the 1 tool, select only what we need, so the blue, hide the ID map, come down, press on the right button on your mouse and go to select invert, and then we can open up the metal map and delete everything but the metal. Now if you want to keep the metal map and not delete the rest of it, then you can simply add a mask down here instead, and anything that was, and then just invert it, sorry, and then anything that was in blue is now visible. So you can also add a hard light or any of these others just to make it look like metal, more like metal. I'm going to go for a hard light and then just bring the opacity down a bit. Moving on to the next one, the bubblegum one. So when looking at this one, you can play around with these and see which one will fit better, but I feel like there's too much pink, so I'm going to change the pink to a more of a reddish orange color. Bring the saturation down a bit and my lightness down a bit. And now when I add it as a screen or color, or look for the one that's going to give me the best result for it. I'm going to add it as a soft light. Yeah, soft light. And then what I'll do is I'll make a mask, invert it, come over to my brushes. What I'll do, we'll leave that for now actually, and we'll come back to that. I would want to go through all these materials with you first and show you how you can use them. So the highlight, the reflective map from ZBrush, I tend to use hard light, but you can also use pin light. You can also change the hue and saturation in here, or the levels, sorry. You can really define what's sharp reflectiveness, and then I usually hide it so I don't see it, so I'm not focusing on it. At this stage I'm just focusing on the other stuff first. So the flat map, which holds all the color information without the shadows, because once you start mixing these materials together, you'll find that you're going to lose a lot of that color information from the base model. So what I tend to do is render out a flat color with just the color information, and then set this to a color map normally, or whichever one brings out the color, brings the color back into it. In this case, screen looks like a good one, or color dodge actually. So we'll just bring the color dodge down a bit, and don't worry about losing the shadow information or whatever, because you can get that back later. So we've just come back down to this cavity map we have, and just bring the cavity down more. We don't want to have it too much emphasis on it. We can bring it down and have a small emphasis on it. And then we'll move on to the lighting. Now the lighting, I tend to use screen on all of them, then turn them all off, and then go individually one by one and turn them on. So this is the rim light that we created, and as you can see we've got rim light everywhere. We don't want rim light everywhere, so for this one we're going to need to use masks to mask out areas that we don't want affected by the rim light. So just grab the small the smooth round brush and start masking out the areas we don't want rim light to be. Under here, because this would be the area here where where the rest of the body will be, so you don't need rim light there. It's mostly just for the back piece here and along the top of the head. Now we can make the rim light slightly less opacity emphasis on it, and then we can move on to the next one, and you can turn them on and off as much as you like and see which ones you think work. If the screen doesn't look like it's working for you, then you can also go to lighten, or any of these other ones within this area here. I think screen's going to work fine for this. We just drop the opacity, drop the fill. Just going back to the flat color, maybe the flat color wasn't the right one to use and soft light would be better. And then we can go down to the base model and change the hue and saturation for this one. So we can bring the colors down on the base model and then darken there. And then it's just a case of fine-tuning, the materials that we created to work with each other. So now you see we have some extra maps here. This one can be a screen, and we can drop it really low down on the opacity and the fill. We just want to hint that there's a light there in that area. And the other ones, like I said in ZBrush, we won't use every single light, so it's just good to have a library of lights in the material section, just so you can refer back to if you want to change them or whatever. You can add the mask here and just take away light that shouldn't be in the areas we don't want it to be. Okay, so when you're happy with that, then you can move on to the next one. So I want to move on to the depth one, because the depth one is going to give us focus the area of where you want the person to look at, and try and pull focus away from places you don't want to look at. So I tend to use a level and make it so the focal point is the face and the rest of the body will just disappear into the background. So if you put this to a overlay, then bring the overlay down, intensity down, and we're now focusing a bit more on this area here. And ambient occlusion, we can adjust the levels of the ambient occlusion so we can get more darkness in there and more crisp detail coming through, and cracks and those shadow areas. We can put that to a multiply. Then the shadow we'll put on as a multiply over the top of all of it, so that it blends it nicely. You don't want the shadow on the bottom underneath the lights, because then the lights will come at the top. So you want it on the top of everything in this type of order that I have here with my masks, with my materials, sorry. And then the final one is the normal map. So the normal map is something I've recently found out that helps my models with lighting. So you can go into the channels section and select either red, blue or green, depending on where you want your light source to be. So I'm going to choose green. And what you want to do, what you want to do is press Control A, Control C, come down to lights and Control V, and that will place that on the top of those. And what you want to do is just add as a soft layer, or soft light, sorry. Just bring the opacity down. Maybe it's either a soft light or one of these other ones. You could even go for multiply. I'm gonna go for soft light. There we go. Now this map material, it will be our subsurface scattering, but I want to change the hue to be more red and orange, and bring up the saturation, bring down the lightness, change it to a color dodge, and add a black mask, and then using a soft brush, just want to fake in those areas where subsurface would be on our character. So you're looking at the eyes, the nose area. You can paint in, paint out areas in here, maybe some on the gums, the lips. On the top of the head, maybe. And then we can take that and drop the opacity. And if you want, you can add a fill layer to add even more to the subsurface scattering. So we just select the mask, turn the layers on, and then delete, select inverted, sorry, and then delete the excess. And then add a mask in there. Control I to invert it, and then paint in more of that subsurface. Take your time in this stage to make it look good. I'm just rushing a little here just to show you how I go about doing it, but you can take your time. And we can just change it to a overlay, and drop the opacity and the fill. There we go. Just coming back to this rim light, I'm just going to paint out that rim light on that chain as well as on that light. Coming back to the materials, the hard light, the reflective pass will be changing to the hard light. Yep. Bringing the opacity down quite a bit. And then you can duplicate this map material because we're going to mask off areas, different areas for different types of wetness to the model. So this one will be the body of our character. If I go to the ID mask, select the red, and then there we go. So everything that's in the red is now being the reflection, sorry, is being changed. And now we bring back this one, which is a duplicate, and we can paint in extra reflection in those wet areas, so like in the mouth, for instance. So put it in there. Like this. And we can even desaturate this one, which will turn into a black and white image. We can also change the type of, maybe not, just change it to, keep it to a hard light. Now for the eyes, I deliberately don't sculpt the eyes in ZBrush, because I find if you're doing a concept piece, it's quicker to manipulate photo bashing or adding from photos rather than paint and detail eyes in ZBrush, where you're trying to speed up your processes with the concept side. So I usually grab a image from the internet, so in this case a tiger's eye, and I just bring this to the top of all of these layers and add it to a new layer called Paint Over. And then I would cut out this eye. Well, actually, wait, I will actually scale it down first so it's all in one place. And then cut out from here, select inverse, delete it, and then maneuver that eye over the place where the eye would be, and then using the transform tools just change it so that it fits nicer with our model. And then go into the hue and saturation and bump up the hue, drop the lightness, and play around with these extra hue settings depending on what kind of eye you want. I'm going to go for an orange, and then you can duplicate that over to the other side, and then flip it, then scale it, and we will use a mask to color out the extra piece we don't need. And I'll use a different brush, just to paint out that eye in there so that it fits better. We will have to do some cleanup work in here as well when it comes to these eyes, and that will be later on. There's one eye. There's the second eye. For this one, the left eye, I'm just going to change the hue on it, make it slightly darker. And then do a paint layer, add an extra layer, and we're going to start painting, just painting these eyes so they fit with the model better. Giving a bit of shadow over the eye area. And blending it into the model so it looks like it fits. Even painting 2 eyes. Now we can add another layer. I tend to just add layers like a lot. You can be more organized with your version, but I tend to just have loads and loads of layers, so that I don't mess up the ones below it. So you can add this, which will be a color dodge. Now you can be as artistic as you like with this stage. If you want to go any further, if you feel like you want to go further, you can go further. We're just going to play around with all these settings until we get exactly what we want. Just darken there, although that ball there, darken there. That's not bad. Now you can take, just turn off the eyes quick, or you can take our mask, select it, and select the inverse, and delete all the information, all that background color information that's in there. So we're just deleting all the stuff that's not the model, basically. There we go. And now we can add, instead of just a pure black background, we can start adding a background in there. So we can add a bit more of a grey background to start with, and then come in with a paint gradient tool in the paint bucket, and you can even select colors from the existing model that we have here. So let's have a bit of a dark purple or darkness on one side, and a lighter color coming from the other side, dark from the bottom. Let's put a rim light source in the back. Bring it down. There we go. Now we can go back to the paint layer, turn that on, put this underneath, we'll put this as the body, come over to our paintbrushes and just blend in. You don't have to paint everything because we're focusing on the head area of this model, so we don't have to worry about painting hide loads of detail for the body. We just want to give it emphasis that there is a body there in the back, and it also gives it artistic style, as if it's merging into a 3D model. Bring this all in. Like so. I'm just trying to find a good color. And we go back to the background. Add a new one, and then select these colors and just paint them in. I'm rushing here, but you can take your time in this section to make it look good. I just want to show you the techniques that I used to work here. on my, or how I use on my own personal pieces. So maybe not do that. Let's go back to the background, add a new layer. Come over here. I got some specific brushes in my palette that I use, but you can use whichever ones you want. Like so. Let's go back to the top. Just add in we go. Now we can come back to these lights. And then back to the background, add another one. We'll use another and then it's just a matter of tweaking the image until you get what you like out of it. So we can change that to now a multiply rather. Quite a lot of S coming from there. Add some more rim light. Go. Right, and then if you want, you can add some extra details, photoshopped in. So if we go to these ones that I've pre-selected, I'm going to choose this one quick to add some extra details. This is typical of concepting. You would usually make a model in ZBrush, or you would make a base model in ZBrush, take it into Photoshop, or take it into a rendering software like Keyshot or Maya or any others, render out the base model, and then come into Photoshop and composite it further. So just going to do that now with this. So this texture is going to give us a extra depth to the skin that we didn't get from ZBrush. And that's why I don't spend a lot of time painting in ZBrush, because I know that I can just come in here and change it later, or add to it later. So we just merge these together, and then we put this to a soft light. Come over to the hue and saturation. You can even bring the hue all the way down, the lightness down. Grab our ID mask, select the red. Where is it? There it is. And then just mask all that out, or in this case, select the inverse, delete the inverse, add a mask, invert the mask, and then paint in that detail again, but in selected areas. So you're just giving the hint of the skin being like that. It doesn't have to be everywhere. Go. Just add in sparingly, then come over to the opacity and bring the opacity down, as well as the fill. So you can just about barely see it, but you know it's there, and it does add to the final image. Then we can add this piece, or this picture, over the top, and we can make it as a rocky um, pattern on the top of his head and along his shoulders, because he is a cave troll after all, and he has a bit of a rough hide on his back and shoulders. So just going to emphasize those in this with this map or texture. Sorry. Merge the layers. Control I to invert the layers. Come over to adjustments, desaturate it, and change it to a multiply or overlay or soft light, and then add a black mask, and then you can paint in those areas where his skin would be harder, because it's a hard hide basically. We can do the same thing with the metal. So let's just add a little bit more rough skin there. Ooh. Let's see what we can change this to, what sort of effects we can get. Luminosity. Yeah, that one looks good. Go. And then we're going to look at the metal. So just go onto any website on Google, type in rusted metal, and paste it in here. This is the one I have from Google, or found on Google. I'm just going to rotate it, and then get that ID mask out again. Just turn that off. Select the ID mask and select inverse, delete the inverse, and stick this as a overlay or soft light. Bring it down. There we are. Now let's see where we can do some final tweaks before moving on to the final pieces of this character. So let's look at this painting on the body. Like I said, this is a very quick demonstration. So if you want, you can take even more time on your one and make it look really cool using these techniques. Darken these areas a bit. Got that one straight. There it is. A rogue pixel there. Okay, so I'm not going to go too much further with this. I could go further. I could add some hair. Actually, I'll do that. I'll add some hair onto the silhouette just to break up that silhouette a bit. So just making a very small brush and just selecting that rim color and then just adding a little bit of hair. Along the edges of this character. Just breaks up that silhouette a bit. There we are. We can even add some hair follicles along the chin. That. There we go. When you're happy with how your model is looking, just bring the color down on this one. When you're happy with the way your creature looks, then we can move on to the adjustment layers. So I'll start off with an exposure layer and just bump up the exposure a bit. Then I'll go to a brightness and contrast and bump the contrast up and the brightness. Before going, well, actually, yeah, carrying on with this, the vibrance, play with the vibrance if you want a bit more vibrant color in there to make your character look more vibrant. You can do that. Just going to come back down to the flat color and adjust the hue and saturation on this one to make it less vibrant, or this map. Just bring the opacity down. I want it to fit in the scene nicer. Okay, so going further, the levels, add some level in there. Darken, make it a bit slightly darker tones. And then color balance. So if you want to play with the color balance, the shadows, you want more blue shadows rather than red shadows, or the shadows you had, then that's fine. You can play around with this one. And the highlights, a bit more of a reddish highlight to it. The yellow tones, bring back those yellow tones. We can add some saliva before we go any further. We can add some saliva coming out of his mouth whilst he's roaring or spitting, and that's just a case of painting in some white lines. Don't go too crazy though. Don't want it to look weird. Like this. There we go. There's his saliva. And then you can use a color lookup adjustment layer to try out different maps or different color lookups. It's quite interesting what you can come out with when using these. So just play through these ones till we find one we think looks cool. There we go. That one looks alright. We'll just slide this down on the opacity so it's not so influential. back to brightness, bring the brightness up a bit, go back down to the flat layer, the base layer, sorry, just play with this hue a bit more, see what comes out. There we go. You can spend as much time as you like at this stage, just making the character look cool. Bring the shadows up, bring the ambient occlusion up. There we go. See if we can play with any more of these lights, or change it to a different one. Yeah. There we go. And that will about do it. Just want to add a fill layer quick. Color overlay. And just bring this all the way down. It just merges those colors better together as a final piece. And then what you can also do is add a noisy layer. There's a soft light. Bring it down to 20, 27 opacity, and then that's it. That's the final piece. So I hope you enjoyed this quick tutorial in Photoshop on how to use the render layers that we rendered from ZBrush in Photoshop and how to composite them using Photoshop and extra brushes and stuff like that. If you enjoyed this short tutorial, please leave a like, comment, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and hopefully I will have more videos in the future showing in more detail the processes I go through to creating concept art.